The Zimbabwean dollar was introduced on the 18th of April 1980, replacing the Rhodesian dollar at the same value. In the early years, the Zim dollar was actually worth more than the US dollar, and Zimbabwe was an industrial giant by African standards, attracting migrant workers from across the region. So what went wrong between 1980 and 2008, and even beyond? How did Zimbabwe move from having one of the strongest currencies in Africa to printing the $100 trillion note in 2008? Well, let's begin in the early 80s. You see, at independence, the government of Zimbabwe did what young nations do. It spent a lot of money trying to correct colonial imbalances in order to fulfill the promise of independence. And here is what the government paid for: a free primary education, a cheap secondary education, affordable healthcare. It provided support for farmers. It put in place price controls to make things affordable. It even hired thousands of new civil servants, skyrocketing the wage bill. And on top of that, there was a huge military spending. Zimbabwe was coming out of a 14-year-long liberation war. The new government had to build a new army from Zipra, Zanla, and the old Rhodesian forces. And then came the Renamo problem in Mozambique, where Zimbabwe deployed its military, pushing defense spending even higher. All of these cost a lot of money. So by the late 1980s, most of the national budget was going to salaries and subsidies. For those who might not know, a subsidy is a targeted financial help by the government to make things cheaper or free for selected groups. An example of this is BIM, a government program which was introduced around 2001 to cover school fees for the needy. So in the early 80s, the government had many such programs, and that increased expenditure. Furthermore, Zimbabwe had inherited an aging manufacturing industry which had survived under sanctions since 1965, when Ian Smith signed UDI. So by the mid-80s, local factories had old machines, and the cost of production was just too high. They just couldn't compete. This caused a big problem. Export earnings fell, and foreign currency became very scarce. So without forex, Zimbabwe could not import fuel, spare parts, or raw materials. So the country now had a double crisis. Number one, the government was spending too much money. And number two, exports were bringing in less money. Expenditure was higher than income. By 1990, Zimbabwe was in crisis and still had a huge government workforce. Industries were weak and protected from competition, so Zimbabwe needed money as soon as possible. The only places Zimbabwe could borrow large amounts were the IMF, the World Bank, and Western superpowers in general. All of them wanted Zimbabwe to make big economic changes. Their message was simple: if you want money, you must change your entire economic system under an economic structural adjustment program, commonly known as ESAP. So tirikuti isusu zvinhu pazvakatanga kuoma, Zimbabwe yakakumbira chikwereti. Zvikanzi neIMF neWorld Bank, mari tinayo tinokupai, but we don't like the way you run your government. You're gonna have to make a lot of changes, and mari iyoyo kana takupai munongoishandisa chete under a program inonzi ESAP, and program iyoyo ine ma-conditions ayo. So Zimbabwe agreed and implemented ESAP from 1991 to 1995. But what really was ESAP, and what was it trying to do? Well, the idea behind ESAP was simple, well, at least in principle. Open the economy, cut government spending, and let private companies lead the economy. In simple terms, it was like saying, Zimbabwe, You must now stand on your own. The government must stop supporting everything. ESAP demanded 5 big changes. Number 1, they said, your government is too big. Cut government spending and retrench government employees to lower your wage bill. Number 2, they said, stop overprotecting your local industries by having laws that discourage imports. Open borders to imports. Number 3, they said, remove price controls. Set the market free. Number 4, they said, reduce the value of your local currency against the US dollar to make it cheaper to invest in Zimbabwe. Number 5, they said, privatize some of your state-owned companies, your parastatals. And so, ESAP was rolled out in 1991 with its sweeping reforms across the economy. But just as Zimbabwe was trying to find its feet under ESAP, a brutal drought hit in 1992. It drove inflation even higher and devastated agriculture, which forms the core of Zimbabwe's economy. By 1994, the promised economic boom under ESAP had turned into a distant dream. Instead of economic growth, the nation faced widespread unemployment. Industries were either declining or shutting down. Inflation skyrocketed and the government reduced its funding for schools, hospitals, and other things that people relied on. The standards, which Zimbabwe had been known for since independence, started going down amid rising poverty. What was supposed to be a pathway to prosperity became a sudden drop into hardship. But what went wrong? Well, ESAP wasn't bad on paper. It made sense in principle. I mean, encouraging trade and allowing markets to function freely, nothing wrong with that. What actually went wrong was timing and implementation. The reforms were introduced too quickly. They were hurried without proper preparation. Remember, I said that the government's wage bill was too big. So ESAP encouraged the government to retrench its workers in the hope that those workers would find jobs in the private sector or start their own small businesses. But what actually happened is that the government reduced its workforce before the private sector was equipped to create new jobs. It opened markets to international competition before local businesses could prepare. And it eliminated subsidies too soon before people's incomes could cover the increased cost of living. Zimbabwe was suddenly thrown into the cold waters of global competition without a life jacket. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share.